All righty. Well, it's a pleasure to be back with you all. The trip to Covington was an awesome trip. It was successful. They will be joining in the work. Um, so praise God for that. We're closer to the goal than we have been yet, and good group of people. They've extended that if we need somebody to fill in, they would be more than happy to come down and send one of their deacons down who preaches regularly. They have a couple men that fill that role that they would love to send them down and help us out. They also shared they would love to just come down and worship with us. If y'all are interested in that, I will pass on the message and see if we can get something pinned down. I know how encouraging it can be to have somebody come in from somewhere else just to have a different voice. Maybe that doesn't sound quite as southern. Um, this morning, I want to talk about what it means to be an heir. So there in Romans 8, verses 16 and 17, it says, the Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. If indeed we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together. Each one of us is part of a family tree, or a family lineage, if you will. Some have inherited money, some inherit land, some inherit nothing material at all. But everyone inherits a name. Every one of us got a name from somebody. And typically that, in our culture comes through the father. But we inherit a family name. And with that name comes the legacy behind it, the history of where that family came from, where they've been, what they valued, and really what they stood for. And what we do with the inheritance that we receive, be it just a name or more than that, it determines completely how the story continues and how those of future generations will recognize and remember the history of the family. So today I want to talk about what it means to be an heir. And not just in the worldly sense, but most importantly, what it means to be in a spiritual one. Because that's what we come here for. We come here for a spiritual message. So the word for us, heir, we know that means one who receives something, an inheritance, or succeeds to the rights or property or something to that effect. That's what that means in our English word. But in Scripture, the Greek word kleronomos is one who receives a portion by lot, and it's not earned. It's given completely through relationship. So when Paul says that we're heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, he's saying that the children of God inherit all things that are God's through his Son. And that's an incredible privilege that we have as being heirs. But with being an heir, it comes responsibility. I mean, we know from the parable of the mine just went blank. Sorry, of the prodigal son. Thank you. My mind just went blank. We saw one who was dealing faithfully and one who went out and just totally blew it. And doesn't mean you can't change, but that's a clear example of one person can do right by it, another can do wrong. But so with us, knowing that it can't be earned, but knowing that it very well could be lost, is really contingent on whether or not we see the value in it and whether we regard that as something that is worth keeping. So being an heir means having more than something to claim. It means having something to protect, something to preserve, and ultimately something to pass on. So let's look at the responsibility of an heir. The responsibility of an heir, it really represents the family name, is expected to uphold its values, its reputation, and ultimately the family mission, if there's one set. In ancient Israel, this would mean continuing on in the family business. This would mean caring for the land that you got by lot, that God had given through after they conquered the land with Joshua. And most importantly, it would have been continuing to honor the God of your fathers. Hearkening back to worshiping and being concerned about the things of God. Likewise, Christians are heirs of a heavenly household, Ephesians 2:19. So our Father's legacy is holiness. It's mercy. It's love. And we are absolutely expected to carry that forward. That is in part of our inheritance, is that we are to take that and bring it forward. And a family's legacy can be destroyed in one generation if the heir becomes careless. And how much more so with those of a spiritual nature. So maintaining the family legacy is at the heart of this inheritance that we receive from God. But secondly, is protecting it for the next generation. So Moses said in Deuteronomy 4 and verse 9, only take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. And teach them to your children and your grandchildren. And Paul makes a similar admonition there in the New Testament, speaking directly to fathers, but it would equally apply to mothers, is that we are to bring up our children in the training and admonition of the Lord. So absolutely, each generation has a responsibility to preserve the truth for the next one, so that torch is ultimately carried. And spiritually, when we think about that, protecting it for the next generation, that really has to do with the truth of the gospel. Not letting a false gospel sneak into what you're teaching. We have to be on guard for that. That is something that is very important. And in that, we come, obviously, the pattern of worship, things that are approved, things that are not, so that we're not engaging in will worship, that we're actually engaging in the spirit and truth that God has asked for, versus doing what we want to do. And the integrity of the local congregation, the body, making sure that we are following the pattern that is set forth, following the apostolic tradition, following things that can be verified by the word. All of that is in that protecting it for the next generation, because you can easily be swayed. And when we think about apostasy and how things evolve or deteriorate over time, it's not like someone comes in the first week and they're like, all right, we're going to start taking the Lord's Supper on Thursday because the Bible said so. Because if they did, they'd get run out of here. But what happens is this apostasy happens over time. It happens slowly. Things are brought up in just casual conversation at first. And then over time, well, why don't we try this? And then you look back 20 years later and it's like, who are we? Who have we become? So it's something we always need to be constantly thinking about. And of course, the hearts of those who will follow Jesus. That is something that we need to make sure is guarded, because if we're not following as examples to those future generations, if we're not following with all of our heart, if we're not getting the spirit part of that combination there in John 4, spirit and in truth, if we're not getting the heart part right, is our example going to be what it needs to be at those moments where our guard's not up? Those moments where we're weak in the fact that you get cut off in traffic and you yell out an expletive and the kid's in the back seat. It's like, if I'm truly devoted to it, I would be more prepared to protect the truth of it and the heart of it and the meaning of it for the next generation if I truly follow it. And then we also have the sad side of it, which is the sorrow of failing to live up to the legacy that is set before us. And you go into this, that none of us are perfect. None of us are going to do it perfectly. There's a difference between stumbling and departing. Big difference. The few things bring more grief than seeing what generations built crumble in the hands of those who don't value it. And that's really what it boils down to. It boils down to, what value do you see in the inheritance you have? So when an heir squanders what is trusted to them, when they take it and they disregard it and they don't value it, and they don't, we think about it in a worldly sense, when they lose the money and they lose all the things, it's not just that he lost the wealth, but he dishonors the name that built it. He dishonors everything that it stood for. And back to a spiritual sense, we have a extremely clean record of an inheritance to clean. We have a God who's perfect, who's holy, who's merciful, who's all loving. So we do have when we fall short of that, it truly is tragic. And it's hard to find more of a distinct example of this than Solomon and Manasseh when you think about the kings of Israel. Solomon being there over the United Kingdom, but Manasseh later being in Judah in the divided kingdom period, or Judah alone period. So Solomon, being the wisest man of all the earth, went after the gods of his foreign wives, even though God told him not to. And even though this happens, even though his father is the benchmark for a heart to please God. So all the wisdom and having the best example of a true heart after God's own, a man after God's own heart, having one who would repent when he messed up and realize that he was not right before God, having the example of David, he wasn't able to overcome it. He chose to follow after these foreign wives with all of that. So we see the drastic change from generation to generation. And with Manasseh, even with all the reforms that his father Hezekiah did, we think back to Hezekiah. Did a sermon, I think, probably 2 months ago now, but we were talking about the Rekha Shabbat that came from Assyria. And he was calling out to the men at the wall, and he was complaining that, don't call after this God of yours, because your king Hezekiah, he won't even let you worship him. That's how drastic his reforms were, taking down the high places, getting everything back to what God wanted. He went so far that those nations around were thinking that he wasn't even letting them worship anymore because they weren't doing it on the high places, weren't doing it on the hills like they were. Yet Manasseh, all those reforms, Manasseh completely reversed everything his father had set forth. And he took the nation of Judah at the time to arguably the darkest place it ever got to. And that's just one generation. Again, you have a great example, and then one who doesn't value what it was given. There is sorrow in knowing that faith, honor, and godly heritage can be devalued and wasted so quickly. And it vanishes if it's not maintained. And this is something that we see in our world today. For me, you think about a family like the Heirs family, famous for the 57 varieties, the ones that put the glass, they first ones doing the glass bottle, because that you could see the truth in what they were selling you, the purity and honesty of the product. And John Heirs, his motto was, do a common thing uncommonly well. He built the Heirs Company on biblical principles. He was a self-professing Christian who looked for quality, fairness, and service. And during his life, he treated employees with dignity. This is the guy who introduced health plans and pensions before anybody. Those were not common. This guy really took taking care of your neighbor as you would take care of yourself. He took that and put it into true practice and let it affect how he ran his business. And he maintained strong moral standards in his business. And when he passed away, his family did not abandon those ideas. And if you look at the Heirs family today, it's the same stature of people that are running the company. The legacy has not been degraded. The generations maintains the brand, the honesty. When you go get Heinz ketchup, you know exactly what you're getting. You're not getting some knockoff. You're not getting something different. They continued the charitable givings. They helped with hospitals and education. All of the things that the father set forth, the founder's faith and his ideals were at the center of the company culture. They maintained it and did not lose it. But then you think about another family that has a big name, the Vanderbilts. What's his name? Cornelius Commodore Vanderbilt. He literally built one of the largest fortunes in American history. And within 2 generations, it was all but gone. And I know we're talking about worldly things, we're talking about money. But this is just an example of how so quickly, if something is not valued, it can be taken and lost completely. I mean, his family, his siblings, his children, they were more focused on lavish lifestyles. They could never get into unity, and they had reckless indulgences that it devoured the money they had. They wanted to look the part rather than be the part. So whether it's family business or it's a name or your spiritual heritage, the principle is the same. If it's not guarded, if it's not taught, it will vanish away. It will disappear. And we must not make the same mistake that in our spiritual walk that we see happen so often in the world. You know, inheritance, whether it's material or spiritual, truly can vanish if it's not valued. Faith, truth, character, and holiness are no different. If we don't regard those things as valuable, it absolutely can be lost. If you would turn to Genesis 25 for me, we're going to look at Jacob and Esau. Genesis 25, we'll start there in verse 29. It says, now Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary. Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, sell me your birthright as of this day. And Esau said, look, I am about to die. So what is this birthright to me? Then Jacob said, swear to me as of this day. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank, arose, and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. I love when the Bible does this. If you'll turn to Hebrews chapter 12 for me, I want to look at the biblical commentary on this. Hebrews 12, verses 14 through 17. It says, pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord, looking carefully, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled, lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. For you know that afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears. I don't know about y'all, but for me, when I think about, the Genesis passage where it says he despised his birthright, and I think the Hebrews, a profane person, I needed to do some digging on this to help me truly understand what this was getting at. So the Hebrew word bazah, translated despise, means to regard with contempt. So in other words, it means you have a deep sense of disdain, disrespect, or disgust towards something, considering it unworthy, beneath you. In effect, it doesn't have enough value to garner your respect, care, or attention. That's a lot packed in that word. And similarly, the passage in Hebrews, characterizing Esau as profane. I think about profane and just my view of like thinking about English. I think about like cuss words and things like that, and that is kind of it, but it's a little bit deeper. Characterizing Esau as profane, according to BDAG, remember that's a lexicographer, not a commentator. It's a student of the language who has searched the meaning of the words using other texts, not just the Bible, to gather what the word means in its context. So these aren't commentators. The term babelios indicates a person that is worldly, opposed to having interest in transcendent matters. So you're so focused on the world, you don't have a care of what God has to say. So when I combine these passages, I can't help come to the conclusion that Esau was completely overcome with worldliness. and was devoid of any interest in the things of God. He had zero interest in spiritual matters. But when we read the narrative, he just sold his birthright. It doesn't seem like it's that bad, but it is. That's how God viewed it. It was that bad. But it also brings me to the point, why? Why would Esau despise his birthright? Why would he be like this? What would cause him to have zero thought for the spiritual? What would cause him to think that his birthright was so beneath him, it didn't have the value for him to even care about it? Him and Jacob come from the same home, same parents. Now, we can all admit there was some favoritism, but it wasn't like it was favoritism where both of them liked one and not the other. So yes, Isaac favored Esau and Rebekah favored Jacob. But it's not like one was just cast aside. They both had that favoritism. That's not great. We all know that's not how you should be brought up in a home, but still, I can't read this, but I can't figure out what the influence, what was it that caused him to do this? Yet when we come to the end of it, the older shall serve the younger. It is what it is. So whether it was a combination of things or whatever, it ultimately boiled down to a heart condition. And I mean that obviously in the spiritual sense. You know, it takes intentionality to remain focused on the things of God. We truly have to have our hearts set on doing what pleases Him. Because as heirs, if we don't, we despise our birthright. Because that's what Esau did. He didn't care about the birthright. He wasn't worried about pleasing God. He wasn't focused on things of a spiritual nature. He was only focused on the world. Do you think Esau knew that he despised his birthright? I mean, do you think he realized the situation that he was in? The fact that he had all his priorities out of sort? I don't think he did. I don't think he truly understood where he was, where he had placed himself. It wasn't one day that when he finally came to it, as the Hebrew writer alludes to, when it was too late, he realized that the magnitude of the little decisions that he had been making every single day led him to the point where he despised his birthright, and now it was too late. There was nothing he could do about it. When you think about the Vanderbilts and the fact that they wasted the inheritance and the family legacy, do you think they realized what they were doing in the moment? I mean, do you think they were thinking, 100 years from now, all we're going to have is a name on a college? That's really all that's left of the family, considering it was one of the wealthiest families in the entire nation. Do you think they made that with intention? Did they know we're just going to cut off the next generation and we're not concerned about it? I don't think so. I don't think they thought about it. I don't think they put it in perspective the way it needed to be. And what was it that caused the Hines family to be different? And we're talking same era. What caused them to be different? I think it's something that we need to have an answer to when we think about our spiritual inheritance. What would cause you not to despise your birthright? What would cause you to value the inheritance that you have? I think it boils down to remembering the why. Now, what was it about Jesus that made you want to follow him? I mean, was it, what was it that made you think to yourself, I recognize that is holy. I recognize that is perfect. I recognize that is somebody worth following. And I want to be like that. What was it? And was it his love for man? Was it the fact that he would endure what he went through just for us? Was it the manner in which he did things, the care for others, the love he showed in his in that we see? I mean, you can just, as you're reading through the gospels, you can feel the love jump off the pages as you know when a leper is totally overcome with leprosy and Jesus doesn't have to touch him. He doesn't have to. He's got complete power. But he reaches out his hand and he touches him. Someone at the time who would not have been touched in a very long time. He takes the moment to touch somebody, to show that love. Is that what does it for you? Is it his stance on truth and how he stood for the truth of the doctrine that his father gave him to tell? Was it over everything else, his desire was to do what his father would have him to do? That he would do the Father's will, even if it meant dying on a cross. That ultimately led him to take on the sin of the world. And the fact that he died for your sin, not his. And if you were raised in the church, do you remember when it became your faith or why it became your faith? At what point did it transition from being your parents' faith that they raised you in, which is everything they're supposed to do? When did that what took it? What was the why? Why did it become your faith instead of your parents? You know, if you came out of denominationalism, why? Why did you make the transition? What was it that caused you to walk away from it, to decide I'm actually just going to follow Jesus the way he asked to be followed? Why? Why did you do it? And no matter what your answer is, the why was that line of demarcation of sorts. That was the day it changed. That was the day it became yours. That was the day you had a purpose. You now have a drive to follow Jesus. And remembering that why is invaluable to not forsaking your inheritance. Remembering the why is the foundation or the core of what you do, how you do it, and how you are able to continue doing it in times where there's struggle. Because you had that aha moment. And when you had it, that's what you go back to. And if you don't, I suggest you do. Go back and remember why. Why do I follow Jesus? Remembering the why is what keeps me wanting to spend time with God. When the world would have me be so focused in everything else going on, the why keeps me coming back and needing to spend time with him. When we have the rat race that I 100% got caught up in, I was not focused on the why. And it led me to complete apostasy at one point. But it was getting that next promotion, earning a bigger salary, and getting the worldly power that comes with it. That's what I got so focused in. But when I finally remembered the why, you're able to put things back to where it needs to be. You're not concerned about the next promotion. You're not concerned about this or that. It's because you remember the why you're doing what you're doing, and you are to continue doing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with trying to get a better job. That's not what I'm saying. But it does not need to be the number one focus in your life. You know, with our 24-hour news cycle that we have, They're going to tell you that you need to be so concerned about everything going on outside of here that and if you don't know what happened in Israel yesterday, you don't really care about what's going on. But that's not important. What's important is knowing that I need to spend time with God, that I need to, instead of being concerned about being out of touch with the world, I need to be concerned with being out of touch with God. And I experienced this, and I see this even worse than it was when I was at the time. But with youth sports, the world would have you believe that if I don't have my child in every single activity, they're going to fall behind, or whatever it is that they're in, they're going to fall behind in that because they need to be there every day after school, every weekend, all summer, all fall, and it goes on and on and on. And that's where my priority needs to be. But that's not it. Remembering the why is when I remember that I'm supposed to be worshiping God. That brings it into focus, that I'm supposed to be living my life for God. So if I get so caught up in my day to day and trying to be world pleasing, if you will, remembering the why brings me back to why I first came to God to begin with. And it helps anchor me knowing that that's not where I need to be. It helps put my priorities in order the way they need to be. Remembering the why is what calls me to know that I need to spend time with God over everything else. Everything else. Because that why is what started your journey. That why is when you decided to change, to transform yourself into what God has called you to be. That why, that is the anchor that we hold to when it's dealing with worldly things. But remembering the why is also what helps you treat people the way that they're supposed to be treated. You know, when the aim of our culture is to be so focused on yourself, the why reminds me to put others before me. The world tells me that I need to be first at everything. But I remember someone said the first will be last and last will be first. I don't always need to win. I don't always need to win every argument. Even if you're right, you don't always have to do that. I don't always need to be the best, the brightest. I don't always need to be the most successful if it means trampling on my fellow man. Because that's not what I'm called to do. Remembering the why changes my perspective completely. And staying focused on it helps me guard off the influences of the world. I mean, we're bombarded with it. I mean, everything that we have around us points us to focus on you, focus on your career, whatever. It all is driving toward you are the most important thing in the world, and you're not. We should be more concerned about others than we are ourselves. Recalling the words of the one who bought me, that the first will be last and last will be first, that helps me put it in perspective, to own it, to know that I need to be truly focused on others. And remembering the why makes me want to give myself to others the way that he gave his life for me. And remembering the why helps me remember the value of the inheritance that I have. When the world would have me to believe that all there is in this life, that all there is this life, there is no resurrection, and we should just eat, drink, and be merry. Remembering the why changes my outlook on sin, because I don't want to be the person that I used to be, because I remember who I was and I remember why I decided to change. He has shown me a better way. He's given us the perfect example. And remember the why, just you know the inheritance you have cannot be left. Can, but it should not. Because remember the why. You remember the value of it. You remember where you would be without it. You know, I was told this, and I thought this was interesting. The guy I was talking to on the phone said he likes to think about his life as being in a motorboat going down a river. And, you know, as you're going down a river, you don't always need the motor running, but you need to be going forward. And you don't know where it's going exactly, but you're down for the ride. But even though you may run up into eddies, you may run up into different things, trees falling down, all kinds of things where you may need to really put that motor in gear and steer back on course. That's what you got to do. Remembering the why is kicking on that motor. Remembering the why, when you realize you've drifted, remember why. Why did you originally choose to follow Jesus? And that helps you get back on course. Because you don't want to just get stranded out there. Because the ways of that leads to death. And even though there are setbacks, and I know there are things that challenge us, there's going to be turbulence, there's going to be obstacles in our way. But if I remember the why, I can always get back on track. And I must get back on track. Every generation stands at the threshold of choice. To treasure the inheritance that's been handed down or to trade it for something temporary. Esau traded his birthright for a meal. Just some stew. The Vanderbilts did it for legacy, or traded their legacy for luxury. And far too many are trading the short pleasures of sin for eternity. We've been called to something far greater. We are heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. When you just read that, at least for me at first, it didn't jump off as completely of what that is saying. You are heirs of God. You are rightful heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. We are all so unworthy, but we've been given it. That inheritance is not us because we are owed it in any way, shape, or form, but because our Father adopted us, made us rightful heirs, redeemed us, and placed us in His name. So now we have a family name to live up to. The question is not, what have we received? What will you do with it? Will we guard it? Will we live up to our Father's name? Will we pass it on uncorrupted? So remember the why. Remember why you were drawn to Christ. Remember the love that drew you to Christ. Remember the cross that bought your freedom. When temptation whispers that your birthright isn't worth it, remember the one who counted you worth dying for. So let's stand fast, heirs of the legacy that we are. Let's cherish our inheritance. Let's guard it with reverence. Live in such a way when your name is remembered, those who see it, they have to look up because that's the why. They don't look on what you built, but they look to whom you belonged. When we think about this inheritance, if you have not become part of the family, you still have opportunity. All you have to do is come believing that Jesus is the Son of God, the Christ who died for every one of our sins, be buried in the waters of baptism, to be raised in the newness of life, and to hold on to your why, and then live every day showing you value that inheritance. And if you are part of the family and you've strayed and you need to come get right with the Lord, we can help you with that. If you need prayers of the group here, we can help you with that. Anything you need, please come forward as we stand and sing.